Back to another video, and today it's a very exciting video because this is the first college football video we're going to be putting out for the new season, focusing on the new season. Today we got the ACC season preview. We're going to take a look at all 17 teams with the newly added teams because of the conference realignment. We're going to look at all 17, predict each and every one of those teams' records, starting from the best team, working all the way to the bottom, and then predicting the conference championship game, etc. So, real quick before we get started, just wanted to point this out in the description. We got a bunch of links. Discord, join that. Twitch, make sure you follow that. Streams will be beginning shortly. We got TikTok, again, videos there will be beginning shortly, and then always the X is going to be linked down there too. Best place to be for, just daily content there. I'm trying to post daily on X, so make sure you go and follow that. With all that being said, though, let's just dive right in to the ACC season preview. So starting out with my number one team, not necessarily conference champion, but this is going to be my number one team in the regular season, and it is the Miami Hurricanes. Now, this is probably surprising for some people because, the favorite is Florida State. I've seen some people say Clemson, and Miami is in that top three discussion, but I haven't seen many people taking Miami here to necessarily win the regular season, but I do think their schedule-wise, and I just think roster-wise, they're a very talented team. I think Mario Cristobal is building a good culture over there. So starting off in week one, they have a tough game here on the road at Florida Gators. Florida's always going to have a talented team as well. And honestly, I know this is going to sound weird, but I do think Florida wins this game, and Miami loses their season opener. I really do think Florida gets the job done, but I do think Miami responds with some pretty easy wins here over Florida A&M, Ball State, South Florida. Not really have to talk about too much there. Starting off with the first game in conference play against Virginia Tech at home. I think it's a crucial thing that they have it at home here. I do really like Virginia Tech. They actually return the most production out of any team in the country, but I am going to take Miami there at home. I think they win at Cal going into the bye. I think they're sitting at 5-1. Coming out of the bye, they got a tough game at Louisville. This could be a trap game. I would watch out if I were a Hurricanes fan here, but I do think they win. Then we got the big matchup everyone's been, waiting for all season. Maybe the ACC game of the year, dare I say. Miami home against Florida State. I think the crucial part is they're at home. I do think they beat Florida State. I think they beat Duke at home. I think they beat Georgia Tech on the road. I think they beat Wake Forest. And this is a tough game. This is could be an upset game. Don't want to be asleep for this game. Kyle McCord is there at Syracuse. They bring in a lot of transfers. I think they have a top 10 transfer portal class this season, but I do think Miami wins this. Finishing the regular season at 11-1, 8-0 in conference. I really do. I think, Cam Ward, this team is very talented. Like I said, they brought in Cam Ward using the transfer portal. I think, I'm not usually a big Miami believer. I feel like this happens every year, but I do think this year could be different. When doing these predictions before I started the video, I was looking at every schedule, and Miami really has a favorable schedule compared to teams like Florida State, compared to a team like Clemson. I don't want to give away any of my sleeper teams, but I do think they have the easiest schedule out of those three. So I do think Miami finishes 11-1, 8-0 in conference, and I think they win the regular season. I think they win the regular season in the ACC. Do I think they win the conference championship game? We'll get to that at the end of the video. But my second place team that they will be facing is the Florida State Seminoles. I think Florida State, even though I already have them losing to Miami, I do think they will still make the conference championship game. I think they win at Georgia Tech. I think they win at home against Boston College. I think these games are all very easy. 4-0 should be a 4-0 start. At SMU, this is another trap game contender because they have a home game, Clemson, next week. I'm looking at this game a lot. If I'm SMU, I'm excited about this game. New to the conference this season, can really show show out, but I do think Florida State takes care of business. I think Mike Norvell gets the job done. I do think they win Clemson. I think it's crucial that they're at home for this game. Um, at Duke, again, this could be a trap game just because of the Miami game, but I do think they win. I think they beat North Carolina at home. I do think they lose at Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a very talented team. I think Notre Dame will be a college football playoff team. They're a very, like I said, very strong, gritty team. I think they will win. It is, in South Bend too, so that doesn't help Florida State's chances. But I do think they finish the season with 2 wins here, beating their rivals, the Florida Gators. I think they finished 10-2, 7-1 in conference, and I think that is enough to get them to be representing the second team to represent the ACC for their conference championship game. But moving to the third place team, this is a team that I'm very excited about this season. It's going to be the SMU. I think they're the Mustangs, if I'm not mistaken. I might have that wrong, but it's going to be SMU here. I think they win on the road against Nevada. I think they beat Houston Christian, no problem. I think they beat BYU at home. I do think they lose to TCU. I know it's at home, but I feel like this could be a trap game here, playing Florida State at home next week. At Louisville, another very tough game, but I do think they win this one coming into the bye week. Coming out of the bye week, they got a nice stretch of wins, I think. They beat Stanford on the road. This is a tough game here at Duke. I think they win. Home against Pitt should be no problems. Home against Boston College should be no problems. At Virginia, and then home against Cal. I think they finished 10-2. This team is a very talented team. They got a high-powered offense, return a lot of their starters from last season. I think they only dropped those 2 games there in week 4 and 5, but besides that, I really think they win the rest of their games this season. I'm liking what I've seen from SMU. I think they have a very solid opening season here. In the ACC, a welcome season, I guess you could say. I'm blanking on their quarterback. His name. He's a junior. He's been there. Is he a junior? He's been there for a while, so I don't want to say he is a junior, but he is very solid. Preston Stone, that's his name. He very solid quarterback. He's been there for a while. I think they finished 10-2 and have a very very solid welcome season here in the ACC. But moving on to the next team, we got the Clemson Tigers. And I do want to trust Clemson. I do want to buy in, but it's really hard to when they just don't make any moves in the transfer portal. I don't understand it. Never been a Dabo Sweeney guy, but yeah, I couldn't tell you why they do this. But so looking at Clemson, they got Cade Klubnik. They got some guys on defense. They have Phil Maffa. He comes back. He was a very solid player there on the edge rusher. Khalil Barnes at corner. He is a very good player. But week 1 at Georgia, that's not going to be a win. I'm sorry. We got Appalachian State, I think, is a win. I think NC State is a win. I think Stanford should be a win. They lose to Florida State on the road. That's going to be a tough game. But I do think they rebound with some wins here. I think they beat Louisville. Louisville, I think, will be a very good team, but I don't think they can go into Clemson and win this game. But I do think they lose at Virginia Tech. This could be somewhat of a trap game. Virginia Tech at home is always a scary place to play. And like I said earlier, Virginia Tech brings back they have the number 1 returning production in the country, so that's crucial for me. So I think Virginia Tech wins this one, but I do think they finish out the regular season with 3 wins there. I think they go 9-3, 6-2 in conference. I don't think it's a bad season at all whatsoever. Maybe a disappointing season if you're Clemson, hoping, but I just can't trust Cade Klubnik in the offense. That's really what it comes down to. But moving on to the next team, we got Virginia Tech actually in 5th place of the conference now. I think they win at Vanderbilt. I think they beat Marshall. At Old Dominion, I think is a win. I think they beat Rutgers at home. I think they lose on the road to Miami, but I think they beat Stanford. I think they beat Boston College. I think they beat Georgia Tech. I do think they lose at Syracuse. Like I said, Syracuse brings in a lot of transfers. They have one of the best transfer classes in the country. On the road at Syracuse, that's going to be a tough one. I think they lose, or I think they beat Clemson at home, like I just mentioned, but I think they lose at Duke. But I do think they cap off the regular season with a win here, home against Virginia. I don't like Virginia at all. I think they're not not a good team whatsoever. But I do think Virginia Tech has a very solid season, going 9-3, 5-3 in conference. And I think they, if I'm a Hokie fan, I'm happy about this. This is a great season for them. But moving on to the next team, we got the NC State Wolfpack. So starting off, I think they win this game. But I do think they lose Tennessee, very, very, very talented team. They do get it at home, so that did make me a little bit intrigued. But I think Tennessee takes care of business. I think they beat Louisiana Tech. I think they do lose on the road against Clemson, but I think they respond with 3 quality wins in a row, beating Northern Illinois, Wake Forest, and Syracuse. I think they lose at Cal. That's a bit of a far travel. I think Cal will benefit from being at home in this conference, but definitely hurt from playing road games. So it's just a little bit of balancing out, I guess. I couldn't tell you why Cal's in this conference, but they are now. I think NC State beats Stanford. I think they lose to Duke here, but I do think they beat Georgia Tech on the road, and I think they beat their rivals, North Carolina, on the road. This is a pretty big win. North Carolina at home, rivalry game. This would be a very good win. If I'm NC State, I'm happy about an 8-4 season. They beat North Carolina. They beat their rivals on the road. That's always a tough game to win on the road in this rivalry, but I do think they get it done. But moving on to the next team, we got the Louisville Cardinals. I think they win week 1. I think they win week 2. No problems there. I think they beat Georgia Tech. I do think they lose on the road at Notre Dame, but I think they lose against SMU. This is a very tough stretch. These 3 of these 4 games. I think they get a win against Virginia on the road, but I do think they lose to Miami. Like I said, Louisville has a very tough schedule. I do really like their team, but the schedule is just not doing them any favors. I think they win on the road against Boston College. I think they lose on the road against Clemson. I think they win against Stanford. They win at home against Pitt, but then they lose their final game on the road against Kentucky in the rivalry game. That's always going to hurt. But 7-5, not anything crazy compared to last season. But a solid season nonetheless. But moving on to our next team is the Duke Blue Devils. I think they beat Elon. I think they win on the road against Northwestern. I think they win against UConn. And I think they win against Middle Tennessee. Very easy non-conference schedule here for the Blue Devils. I would expect them to start off 4-0. I think they win against North Carolina at home. They have it at home. I think they lose at Georgia Tech, though. Maybe they get beat up. They put all their cards out for this rivalry game. They lose on the road against Georgia Tech heading into the bye. And then coming out of the bye, I think they lose their next 3 games. I think they lose to Florida State, SMU, and Miami. Ultimately, it just comes down to I don't think they're better than these teams, really. You're always going to see upsets, but it's Florida. They're not better than Florida State. They're not better than SMU. They're not better than Miami. So I think they drop all 3 of these games. But I do think they beat NC State. I think they beat Virginia Tech. These are 2 teams that I'm pretty high on this season. So these are 2 very quality wins. I think they finish out with a win over Wake Forest, putting them at 8-4, 4-4 in conference. So they do actually have a better overall record than Louisville, but not in conference. So that's why they're behind them. But yeah, very solid season for the Blue Devils. I think last season they were 8-4 too, so back-to-back 8-4 seasons for them. I would be very happy about that if I was a Duke fan. Moving on to our next team is UNC. Now UNC is an interesting team because from what I've heard, they shouldn't. Nobody thinks they're going to be good, but when you look at the schedule, it is very favorable. They do not play very many good teams at all. So I mean, look at the schedule. It's just abysmal. I already have their 3 losses on here. I do think they lose at Minnesota in the opener. I think that's a tough game, a bit of a travel, but I do think they respond with 3 easy wins. James Madison uh, could give them some problems, but I think they win. They're at home. I think they win at home against Pitt. I think they beat Georgia Tech. I think they beat Virginia. I think they beat Wake Forest, but I do think they lose at Boston College. I think this is a bit of a trap game looking ahead to this NC State game. I think they finished 7-5, 4-4 in conference. Hey, I mean, they made a bowl game, so there's always that. I I could realistically see, like, I mean, it's crazy because this team could be anywhere from like 6-6 to 11-1. This loss I think is this Florida State game. I don't think there's any world they win, but all their other losses they could come out on top in any of these games. So I wouldn't be surprised. North Carolina is a very high ceiling, low floor because I don't like their roster. I mean, they have. I mean, Omarion Hampton is an animal at running back, so he could single-handedly win them a lot of games. Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't they're just their team isn't great, so I got them going 7-5. But moving on to our next team is the California. Are they the Golden Bears or just the Bears? We got Cal here coming in next. Yeah, so I think they win this game in week 1. I think they lose at Auburn. Jordan Hare is a tough place to play. I don't think they get it done. It's pretty far travel, but I do think they beat San Diego State. I think they lose on the road at Florida State. Coming out of the bye, I think they lose to Miami. I think they lose to Pitt, 3 losses in a row, but I think they respond with a home win against NC State. I think they beat Oregon State. They lost DJU. He's at Florida State now. I'm not high on Oregon State coming into the season. I do think they lose at Wake Forest, but I think they respond with 2 quality wins here. Well, I don't want to say quality. A quality win depends on how you define quality. I think Syracuse is a solid team. It's a okay win here against Syracuse, and I think they take care of business against Stanford. Stanford's probably, well, I don't want to say worst team, but they are definitely one of the worst teams in this conference. I think Cal goes 6-6. I think they get a bowl game. I don't have them winning an away game, which is kind of crazy, but all their away games are. I mean, look at these. Look at this travel. They got to go to Alabama, Florida, Pennsylvania. I don't know where Wake Forest is, to be honest, and then Texas. Those are all pretty far travels. I mean, yeah, that's just what's going to happen when you're Cal in the ACC conference realignment. What an idea. But moving on, next team we got to look at is Boston College. I think Boston College loses at Florida State, first game of the season. It shouldn't be any surprises there. I think they beat Duquesne, but I think they lose at Missouri. Missouri's going to be a very good team this year. I think they lose home against Michigan State. I just don't think talent-wise they match up very well. Western Kentucky, I think they win. I think they lose at Virginia. I think they lose at Virginia Tech. I think they lose against Louisville. I do think they beat Syracuse, but I think they lose at SMU. I think they respond with a win against UNC, and then they finish out the season with another win against Pitt, putting them at 5-7, 3-5 in conference. They just barely miss a bowl game. So yeah, that's spoiler alert. None of these teams down here are making a bowl game at this point, but you know, it's not every team's gonna make a bowl game. So if you're a fan of any of these teams, I'm sorry. I do not believe you will be making a bowl game. But moving on to the next team we got here is Pitt. I think they beat Kent State. I think they lose at Cincinnati. I think they lose against West Virginia in the backyard brawl. This could go either way, but I do think they lose. I think they beat Youngstown State. I think they lose at UNC, but I think they beat Cal at home. I think they beat Syracuse at home. I think they beat Virginia at home. They lose at SMU. They lose to Clemson, they lose to Louisville, they lose to Boston College, finishing them at 5-7, 3-5 in conference. There's not much to get excited about this Pitt team. Syracuse is the next team we got up. I think they beat Ohio. I think they beat Georgia Tech. I think they beat Stanford. I think they beat Holy Cross. I think they beat UNLV. Starting off 5-0, pretty solid here. But I think this second half of their schedule is just going to be a big wake up call for Kyle McCord, and all of them over there. I think they lose at NC State. I think they lose at Pitt. I think they win against Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, I think, is going to be a very good team. So this is going to be a good win. I don't see them losing all of these games in this stretch. So I think they will beat Virginia Tech at home. I think they lose at Boston College. I think they lose at Cal. I think they beat UConn. And then I think they lose their final game of the season against Miami. Putting them at 7-5, so I guess I lied. There is a team in here who makes a bowl game. But 3-5 in conference. Nothing special here. I think I think they win 7 games just because of how. I mean, look at this. I mean, these 5 games out of this is in conference. And so is this. These first 5 games should be no-brainer wins. I mean, this is a very easy opening schedule. Like I said, I think they have a wake-up call, but this UConn game should be another win. I think there's a very high floor, low ceiling for this Syracuse team. I think no matter what, I think they make a bowl. Just because of Kyle McCord. I know he wasn't the right quarterback for Ohio State, but I think at Syracuse he'll shine a bit more and look a lot better just because of the competition he'll be playing is a little bit weaker than in the Big Ten. But I think Syracuse should make a bowl game. When looking at the schedule, this should be a win, 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 and this should definitely be a win. So that's already 6 wins right there. I think some of these games could go either way. I think you could argue they beat Boston College. I think you could argue they beat Cal. You could argue they beat Pitt too. This isn't a hard schedule, in all honesty. The only games I think there's no shot they win, I don't think they beat Miami. I don't think they beat NC State. But any of these games could go either way. Now, this game could definitely go in Virginia Tech's favor, so that could be another loss for them. But, yeah, Syracuse is an interesting team this season. So just keep your eye on them. Like I said, very easy schedule. But moving on to the next team, Wake Forest. I think they win this game. I think they win this game. I think they lose. Ole Miss is a very good team. They're not going to beat them. But I think they beat the Raging Cajuns. I think they lose at NC State. They lose home against Clemson, but I think they beat UConn. They lose at Stanford. Bit of a tough, far travel there. I think they beat Cal, though, at home. But then these last 3 games, very tough games. On the road against UNC, I think that's going to be a loss. On the road against Miami, I think that's going to be a loss. And then home against Duke, I do think that will also be a loss. So that puts them at 5-7, 2-6 in conference. Yeah, there's not much to talk about here for Wake Forest. But moving on to our next team is Stanford. Now, a lot of people are saying Stanford will be the worst team in the conference this season, and I don't think they'll be the worst team, because I think there is a team that I think will be worse, because this schedule really isn't. I mean, it's not easy, but this isn't a hard schedule. I think they lose their opener against TCU. It is at home. I think they beat whatever school this is. They lose at Syracuse. They lose at Clemson. They lose against Virginia Tech. They lose at Notre Dame. They lose against SMU. They beat Wake Forest, though. But then they lose at NC State, lose against Louisville, lose against Cal. I think they beat San Jose State. It's funny, I'm saying this isn't a hard schedule. It's not an easy schedule. I mean, I have them winning 3 games. But if you put like a mediocre ACC, like if you put, I don't know, Louisville in this schedule, I mean, Louisville could beat TCU. I think Louisville would beat TCU. I think Louisville would beat Syracuse maybe. They could win against Virginia Tech. They could win against SMU, NC State, Cal. But Stanford's not a good team. That's the difference maker there. It's not a hard schedule, but they're just not a good team, so they're not going to do anything this season. Moving on to our next team, Georgia Tech. I think they lose against Florida State. They beat Georgia State, but then they lose at Syracuse, at Louisville. They beat VMI. They beat Duke at home. Then they lose at UNC. They lose against Notre Dame. They lose at Virginia Tech. They lose against Miami. They lose against NC State, and then they lose against Georgia. They're not winning that game. Finishing at 3-9, 1-7 in conference. Yeah, it's not a good season at all. But I have Virginia being the worst team in this conference, just because, I mean, their schedule is kind of hard. I'm not even lying. They're not a good team whatsoever. They're gonna beat Richmond. I hope at least. They lose at Wake Forest. They lose against Maryland. I have them losing against Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina is one of those teams that they put together some good seasons. It's on the road. I think they lose. I do think they beat Boston College coming out of the bye, well rested. But I think they lose against Louisville. They lose against Clemson. Lose against UNC. Lose against Pitt. Lose at Notre Dame. They lose against SMU, and they lose against Virginia Tech. They dropped the last 7 games on their schedule. I don't think that's ridiculous to say, to be honest. I think they finished 2-10, 1-7 in conference, putting them as the worst team in this conference. But let's take a look at the whole conference standings. Let's see if I can get all 17. There we go. So yeah, you can take a look on the left side there. That's what I have right now for my ACC predictions. Before we end the video, we got to talk about the conference championship game. So it's going to be Miami taking on Florida State. I think that, whether it's Florida State is the 1 seed, and it doesn't really matter the seeding, but I do think coming into it, Miami will be ranked ahead of Florida State just because of the record advantage. Miami did beat Florida State in the regular season. And I do think these teams, talent-wise, are pretty evenly matched. What I think the conference championship games comes down to is, I'm going to say this right now, I've said this many times before, it is very hard to beat a good team twice. I think Florida State is better defensively and in the trenches than Miami is. They have DJU versus Cam Ward, two quarterbacks that were in the Pac-12 last year, moving to the ACC from Oregon State and Washington State, the 2 teams that were left for dead in the Pac-12. I guess that's the storyline right there. But Cam Ward and DJU, I think Cam Ward is a little bit better quarterback-wise, but I think Florida State has the better surrounding cast. I think Florida State is better coached, and like I said, I think it's very hard to beat a good team twice. So I do think Florida State beats Miami in the conference championship game, putting them both at 11-2, Florida State being the ACC champion, and I think Florida State gets in to the college football playoffs. Will Miami get in at 11-2? I don't want to spoil that because I'm going to make a video for my preseason playoff predictions, but I will say Florida State gets in because of the auto bid for winning their conference at 11-2, and I think Miami, I don't want to spoil the seeding or anything, but Miami will be sitting there at 11-2. So we can look at Miami's schedule one more time. They'll be sitting there. Only loss against Florida and Florida State, which they also beat earlier in the season. They have wins over Virginia Tech, who I think will be good. Like I said, win over Florida State. Will this resume be enough? We'll have to wait and see. But so thank you guys for watching this video. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Not only do we do college football, we do college basketball, NBA, NFL, and MLB. We're going to try to post at the very least weekly, but it's probably going to start ramping up soon. At certain points in the year, we got like 4 videos a week. So just subscribe. It's only going to go up from here content-wise, starting with the college football stuff. We're going to keep on rolling with the MLB stuff. And, the NFL season's coming too, so got a lot of content on the ways. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to check out the links in the description. Like I mentioned, Discord, X, TikTok, Twitch videos and streams will be coming shortly on those. But with all that being said, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.